I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn, which is Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. And welcome to my report from the New York State Senate. As you know, one of the most important things that we do here in the state legislature is deal with the state budget. The state of New York has the third largest budget in the entire country after the federal government and the state of California. And if we were our own country, we'd be the 9th largest economy in the entire world. So this is a really big part of what we do up here. And so I'm happy today to have a good friend talk a little bit about the budget and what we're doing and some of the decisions that are being made in the budget. And that's Ron Deutsch, the Executive Director of the Fiscal Policy Institute. Thanks, Ron, for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, all right.
You're one of the few people who consistently come on the show, so I appreciate it.
I'm happy to.
So tell everybody a little bit about the Fiscal Policy Institute and what you folks do over there.
Sure. Fiscal Policy Institute's been around since 1991, and every year we basically do an analysis of the governor's executive budget proposal. We look at the good, the bad, and the ugly in that proposal, and then we make recommendations for how that could be changed, improved, what's been left out, and maybe what should be left out.
Right.
So, but we really look at it from a perspective, we're a group of researchers and analysts and advocates, and we really look at the budget, with the framework that, society shouldn't be judged on how well the wealthiest are doing, but how well its poorest residents are doing. So
how are we doing?
Not so good.
Okay.
Yeah.
What should we be doing better?
Well, I think that right now we are not focused enough on the poorest among us in New York State. We have got a major poverty problem. Certainly areas in Brooklyn have very high concentrations of people living in poverty. The Bronx and other areas in New York City, our upstate cities have child poverty rates hovering around 40 to 50%. So, we've got a major problem in this state that is going unaddressed year after year after year. And sadly, it's because we don't have the resources, or we're told we don't have the resources that we need to address some of these problems. So I guess what we would suggest is we ask those at the top to pay a little bit more, and so that we can provide for those at the bottom. And, we live in a society right now where so few have so much and so many have so little, right? We have the greatest income inequality of any state in the nation right now in New York. And that's something that we really aren't addressing. And I don't think that the governor's budget addresses that at all.
Mm-hmm. So we already do a maintenance tax, correct?
We have a surcharge, yes.
Okay.
That's temporary in nature.
Right. But in effect for this year, for this fiscal year.
Yes.
Right.
So that applies to single individuals with incomes over $1 million and married individuals with incomes over $2 million a year. They pay a rate of 8.82%.
So you did suggest that we should do some things around, financial mobility and kind of income, moving like that. So,
yeah.
So explain to me more what you'd like to see. I mean, we have a maintenance tax. You sound like that's not enough.
Right.
What else should we be doing?
So, I would say a couple of things. Number one, every time we talk about increasing taxes on the wealthy, the governor and others will come up with their continuous mantra of, the millionaires are going to flee New York. Which we know based on research, it's just not true, right? People who live in New York, they want to live in New York, especially wealthy individuals. Right. They can live wherever they want, right? So it's not a question of, are they going to leave New York? It's a question of they want to be in New York. Right. So we're saying basically, let's add a couple of brackets onto the tax structure for those making over $5 million, $10 million, or $100 million a year, and just increase that 0.5%. So it's not really a big hit to them, but it would raise about $2 billion that we could use to help those who need relief the most. So I guess we would suggest, we tax the wealthy a little bit more and then use that money to provide tax relief to struggling working families in this state that are, living below the poverty level in many instances.
Right. But you don't think that the problem that's causing poverty in the state of New York is overtaxation.
No, that's certainly, I think we've had a problem with poverty in New York for a long time, and sadly we've been overlooking it and really kind of sweeping it under the rug. I mean, think about the fact that, if 50% of the kids in a community had a cold, we'd call the Centers for Disease Control, and it would be, we'd be declaring an epidemic. But when half the kids are living in poverty, we largely turned a blind eye to it, and I think that's it's unfair.
So what should we be doing from a policy perspective in addition to income redistribution?
So one of the things we could do, there's some very good working family tax credits that exist. For instance, the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Empire State Child Tax Credit.
But we have those already.
We do, but we should be enhancing them, right? The governor keeps talking about tax relief for middle-class New Yorkers, and we're literally spending billions to provide peanuts to the average working family in New York. So a better use of that money, I think, would be to help those at the very bottom who are struggling to make ends meet, making decisions every day about whether do I pay my rent, do I pay my food, do I, pay my electric bill, what am I going to pay or not pay at this point because I don't have the income. So, you've got the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Empire State Child Tax Credit. We should be expanding those. And there's a number of bills out there right now that would expand those and, put more money into people's pockets. And these are folks who are going to spend that money in their communities. They're not going to take their Earned Income Tax Credit check and open an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. They're going to spend that right in their community. And that generates economic activity. That's good for the economic vitality of communities. So, we can be doing that. We need to address this homelessness crisis that we're facing right now. I mean, we have more homeless in New York now than we ever had. And under the governor's watch, those numbers have been going up dramatically. So, we need the governor to start paying more attention to addressing homelessness. And certainly the Senate budget resolution and the Assembly budget resolution both support the Home Stability Support Program, which would help people, that are dealing with evictions, victims of domestic violence, at risk of becoming homeless, with a rent supplement. So that's another way we can do this. So there's lots of ways that we can do it, but I think, part of the problem is that, all too often I would suggest that Albany operates under the golden rule, so that being he who has the gold makes the rules. So, I think we really need to pay more attention to the needs of the average, low-income working families in this state. And, the governor right now is just fixated on whether or not the wealthy will move. But it's a bit disingenuous on his part, I think. I mean, he's basically saying, let's continue the current millionaire's tax as is, and that's just fine. But if we add a 0.5% to someone making over $5 million, well, that's the breaking point. They're gonna, they're getting in their U-Haul and trucking it out to Florida. So, I think that's erroneous as well. And we've had, scores of millionaires at this point who wrote a letter, the patriotic millionaires who wrote a letter to the governor and the legislature saying, it's okay. You can tax me more. A 0.5% increase isn't going to affect my quality of life in any way, shape, or form. And, these are folks that are very tied to their community through philanthropic giving, through board seats, and they want to be in New York, right? So, I think there's a lot of room for improvement here, and we can kind of reconfigure the state's finances in a way that makes more sense. I think we're wasting a lot of money also on economic development programs, I mean, the Amazon deal is a perfect example of that. The governor was very frustrated with the legislature, it seems, and blamed them. But in reality, I think, the governor, if he was looking for someone to blame, should look in the mirror because, he basically negotiated a deal in secret, did an end run around the state legislature and the New York City Council, then announced he was giving $3 billion to the richest man who owns the richest company in the world and expected everybody to jump up and down and, say, Yahoo, great job, governor. People had questions about it and whether or not this is a right, policy option here to be providing, these very wealthy companies with these kinds of subsidies. So, you've got Google and Facebook that are expanding, thousands and thousands of jobs in New York City and not asking for a dime to do it. So, Amazon knows that this is where they should be because we have the talent pool, we have the infrastructure that they need. But the thought of bad PR, I guess, was enough to scare them away.
Right.
But we have a responsibility, I think, as citizens and certainly as legislators, as yourself, to ask those hard questions about whether or not this is the right way to go about it. And we're spending $10 billion a year in state and local monies on economic development initiatives that aren't producing the results that they claim to. I think, the scandals alone that we've seen, there's been, trials and convictions, people going to jail, and, many of these people in the governor's inner circle and focused on economic development. It's a problem, and we need to clean up this system and really rethink our approach to this.
Good. Now, in the beginning of this process, and this is a part of the process that people usually don't talk about, but is the revenue projections.
Right.
And it was kind of exciting. Like, so typically when people think about budgets, they think about spending money.
Right.
Most people don't actually think about like how the state actually earns money, and that's
Right.
actually part of what you were talking about when we started talking about millionaires' taxes.
Yep.
And is the revenue side of the ledger.
Right.
So, explain to folks kind of what happened. Apparently the Assembly and the Senate and the governor get together and agree upon revenues, but this time couldn't agree, and so the state controller decided. How did that work?
So every March 1st, there's supposed to be what's called a consensus revenue forecast. So that's when, the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor will come together and they'll agree on how much money there is to spend. So the governor, obviously, for the last couple of months now, has been talking about the fact that money is coming in slower than anticipated, much lower than anticipated. We had about a $2.3 to $2.6 billion budget gap, and he blamed blamed SALT,
Right.
which is the state and local tax deduction. So
Right.
as your viewers may know and maybe finding out themselves, there was a limitation of $10,000 that could be deducted in state and local taxes from your federal return. So that tends to impact upper income New Yorkers more than lower income New Yorkers, certainly, or middle income New Yorkers, who are largely taking the standard deduction and not itemizing on their taxes. So, so nevertheless, the governor was blaming SALT, which really probably wasn't the case. It could have been that his, tax projections were wrong, his revenue projections were wrong to begin with, and then B, the fact that, people were prepaying taxes as a result of the new tax law. Wall Street had a horrible end of the year in December. We don't know where bonuses are going to be. So, so there was a lot of heated discussion around that. But, the Assembly and Senate basically came in and said, I think we have a little more money than you think, Governor. And the governor was like, no way, we absolutely don't have that money. So then as a default, if all three sides can't agree, that gets kicked to the state comptroller to come up with an estimate. So, and he basically was close. I think he was he had an extra $190 million more.
So you essentially agree with the Assembly and the Senate?
Yeah, more so than the governor. Yeah, but I think everybody agreed that there was less money available, which speaks to the need potentially to raise more revenue in lots of different ways. And I think since we put the millionaires tax in place, right? We've seen a 72% increase in the number of millionaire tax filings in New York State. So millionaires aren't hurting right now. If they're moving out of the state, others are quickly replacing them. Right. So there's room at the top for some taxation. And you've also seen this explosion of, wealthy foreign investors and sheikhs from Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi and Addis Ababa buying these, ridiculously expensive luxury condos in New York City, right? One was just sold for like $238 million. I mean, that's mind-blowing,
money,
right? So, and these are folks who aren't living in New York. They come in for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's kind of their little crash pad. which must be great.
Right.
But what we're saying, and what the Senate is saying in their budget resolution, is that we should be looking at an additional tax on some of these folks, right? Because they're not paying New York City income tax because they don't live here, so they're not making a significant contribution to the local economy. So we're saying if your second, third, fourth, or fifth home in New York is over $5 million, $10 million, $25 million, you pay an additional annual tax on that. So, and then we get again, oh, if you do this, these people aren't going to come here. If someone's buying a $100 million condo, I don't think they're going to be like, well, I got to pay an extra, 1% or 2% in taxes on this. I don't think that they really care that much, right? So, and they want to be, again, they want to be in New York. People want to be in the city. They love the city. It's a status symbol for many people. So, I'm not saying that it won't affect anybody's behavior, but, the notion that all of a sudden people are just going to get up and move is totally overblown.
Right. So tell me this as we start to wrap up, because we always need more time than we
I know,
have.
I talk too much.
No, you're fine, you're fine. So, we talked a lot about revenue, we talked about poverty. Talk about a bit about some of the rest of the parts of the budget, education, housing, healthcare.
Yeah, so I think in terms of education, the governor came in at a very low number. In terms of education.
But a lot of that's the budget dance, right? Like he cuts the budget, we put the money back, everybody thanks the governor.
Right. So that's part of the budget dance. But I think, the fact is, the Assembly and the Senate came in, considerably higher than where the governor was because, again, we're woefully short on meeting the state's commitment to provide a sound basic education through the foundation aid formula, which was set up to ensure that we provide a sound basic education. We're about $4 billion short of meeting that goal at this point. So we need to invest more in education, and we know education is one of the keys to helping people move out of poverty. So we need to make sure that we have universal pre-K, we have the Head Start programs, we have the daycare provisions, the after-school care. I mean, we need all of these things. These are not optional. They should be, every school should have them.
Right.
And sadly, in many of our low-wealth communities and communities of color, schools aren't getting the funding that they desperately need, and we're spending a lot less per pupil in those schools than we are in many of the kind of suburban Westchester schools. So
we're trying to address that in our one house.
You absolutely do. So I think that's good, but I think the other problem is we're artificially forcing spending to be low because of this 2%
cap.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a lot about that on our next show. Once again, we've run out of time. But Ron Deutsch, thank you very much, the Executive Director of the Fiscal Policy Institute. Lots of information. Again, very large budget, lots to talk about. But if you have questions about the budget or any other matter, feel free to reach out to me in my office, 718-629-6401. I'm Senator Kevin Parker, and this has been my report from the New York State Senate.